know we do some weird shit. But if some... yeah, I'm just saying, like, we do have our moments. Like,
we live in that moment.
We live... Hello, 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 and welcome to Well Shit. It really is that simple. I'm Claire.
And I'm Serena. On this podcast, we help you to understand about your 12 universal needs, why they are currently not being well met,
how to meet them in ways that work for you, and how to consistently do so in quick, easy, and simple ways that fit seamlessly into your life.
We'll also help you to understand how doing so will have a positive ripple effect in literally every area of your life.
If you like what you hear, sign up for more support with meeting your needs with your weekly Universal Needs notes at theuniversalneeds.com.
And enjoy the show.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hey, everyone.
Hello. So we are on episode 2 of our little mini series on Selfirst. So in the last episode, what we did was we looked at getting a little bit more specific about what Selfirst is, about what self isn't, and about some of the nuance around it that can help make it a little bit clearer. Today, we're going to look at one of the most important things actually when it comes to talking about being self-first. And that is the difference between the difference between doing harm and not meeting needs that were never your responsibility. Now, the reason this is so important is that one of the challenges people have is when it comes to being self-first is not really understanding what it means to negatively affect somebody else's needs or to do harm to another person. And obviously, if we're looking at the definition of self-first being taking care of our needs as a priority at the minimum in ways that do not do harm to others, it's really important to understand exactly what that means. Now, one of the challenges that happens around this is that people are so used to meeting other people's needs for them, even when it's not their job, even when it's not their responsibility, maybe because of their conditioning, maybe because that's what they saw their parents do or other people do. Maybe it's a strategy to try to get their own needs met. Like, I'm going to take care of your needs because then you'll need me. So it means that you won't leave me, or you'll like me, or you'll spend more time with me, or whatever it is in order to help support our needs. That what they end up doing is they perceive stopping that as negatively impacting the other person. So if you've been doing throughout your life quite a bit of stuff to meet other people's needs, the perception is if I stop doing that, I'm negatively impacting the other person. But the thing is, there is a massive difference between doing harm to another person and not meeting needs that were never your responsibility, but the other person feels entitled to. The other person feels entitled to maybe because you've always done it, maybe because they believe that's how it should be, maybe because they've got so used to you doing it that they believe that that's how it's meant to be. Because you've been doing it for so long, for example. And the thing about it is it's important to remember that not giving someone else your time and energy or something they feel entitled to, which you do not owe them, is not the same as negatively impacting them. I'm going to say it one more time. Not giving someone your time and energy or something that they feel entitled to, which you do not owe them, is not the same as negatively impacting them. Saying no to somebody for something that is not your responsibility is not negatively impacting them. The thing about it is that people should be grateful when you do things that meet their needs, because it's not your job, it's not your responsibility. And I remember contextually we're talking about here adults who are capable and able, have the ability to meet their own needs. It's our responsibility to take care of those for ourselves. So when somebody else comes along and meets needs in that context, we should be grateful for that because it's an above and beyond. It's something we get as a bonus. But the thing is, they don't have a right to it. And since we've been taught to be very codependent in our relationships, and most people don't know how to meet their own needs, which is the key here, those people do end up often expecting it, which means that they perceive the removal of such behaviors to be harmful to them. That is not what harm is. This is not the case. The thing about it is we have a responsibility to be respectful of others, to not do harm to others, but we do not have the responsibility to meet needs if they are the adult who has the capacity and the ability to meet it for themselves. Sometimes we don't have the capacity to meet our own needs in the way we would want to, but we have the capacity to meet our needs in the way that we can. That's how we do it. That's us taking care of our needs and taking responsibility for meeting our needs. But if we are an adult who has the ability to meet our needs for ourselves, it is our responsibility to do so. I want to give like a kind of a weird an extreme example to this, and it's something that we've used previously. So imagine if for some bizarre reason, I know we do some weird shit, but if I'm just saying, like we do have our moments.
We live in that moment.
It's home. That's where like weird shit is our home. So if imagine for some weird reason, if since being an adult, I had been feeding Serena every meal that she'd ever had. I mean, that's weird just on its own. I mean, I'm just saying. It was interesting. I saw, what did I see the other day? It was one of these, one of my guilty pleasures is some of the...
crap TV.
Very, very crap TV. Very crap TV. And this was one of the, I don't know what it was. I don't know whether it was Bachelor or Married at First Sight. I mean, yeah, I've got some really terrible taste in TV shows at times. Something that I just do not need to think about. Although actually it can be very interesting looking at them from a needs perspective and seeing the behaviors from a needs perspective. Very interesting.
Reality shows, when you get into needs, it's like, oh, yes. It brings a whole new level of dynamic. And I want to think about what I'm about to say very carefully, because it adds another layer of learning and growth for Claire and I to be able to watch something and identify it in a show that
looking at it through a needs lens.
Yes, exactly. Looking through it through a needs lens. And what I didn't want to say is kind of getting an entertainment value out of unmet needs.
Yeah.
And that's not it, but it's looking through that lens and being
it helps you sometimes understand it even better when you go, oh, that's that need and that's that need. It's like it can be very interesting to see how unmet needs and these dynamics play out. So I was watching one of these shows and there was a guy who described himself as like a consummate gentleman, and the morning after this couple had spent their first night together, he was wanting to feed her breakfast. And she was a little bit like, actually, no, I'm a grown woman. I can do that for myself. And not only can I do that for myself, I want to do it for myself. It doesn't feel good. And I mean, especially like contextually also, this guy has a daughter, like he's like a child. So I think it felt very kind of like dad feeding a child. Like something about it, the whole thing felt a bit, I'm not really sure. And maybe there are people who like it, and maybe there are people who that would work for both people. No problem. Like you do you, as long as you're not harming yourself or anybody else, you do you. But for me, I'm like, it just didn't feel like something I would have enjoyed. And obviously the other woman in this situation also felt the same way. I was like, yeah, no, I don't think I want that. Thank you very much. So imagine in a very, very weird world that since Serena was adult, I had been feeding her every single meal. Now, she has no reason that I would be feeding her every single meal. She has the ability to feed herself. It is just something that I have done, and she's got into the habit of me doing it. Now, imagine how if one day out of the blue, all of a sudden I say, actually, I'm not going to feed you today, because she's got used to it and there's a certain level of expectation because it's always happened. There's the perception that I'm doing harm to her because I'm quote unquote removing something from her that was meeting her needs. Well, yes, technically speaking, I am removing something that was meeting her needs. But here's the kicker. I'm removing something that I was doing that was never my job or responsibility. I mean, Serena could be grateful that I had fed her every meal. I'm not sure she would have been. I know I wouldn't have been.
Only if you do it as a choo-choo.
Well, and the thing about it is like, I don't know if someone did that for me, would they be able to do a Claire mouthful?
I believe I could.
You could do a Claire bite. Like
Claire bite. The perfect bite
perfect
with
bite.
one little bit of everything on the bite.
I'm
That's a
one of
Claire
those,
bite.
yeah, one of those weird people. I like to have everything on every single bite. And I always like to have the best bite last. Like it's just, yeah.
She pushes it aside. I'm like, oh, there goes her best bite.
There's
She's
my best
saving
bite.
that
I'm
one.
saving that for the end. I did say we were a bit weird. I was not lying. So imagine that I've stopped doing this. The perception is that I have taken something away from her. But in reality, all those years, although, I mean, it may not feel like it given the example I'm giving, I was doing something extra to meet her needs that was a bonus and something that she could have been grateful for in that period of time. But the removal of that is not something to be perceived as harm, because it's not. It was something that was never my responsibility. It was just something I was doing as an above and beyond. Now, it might have been viewed by both parties as something that should be happening because we're both in a habit of doing it. So this can sometimes take a little bit of unlearning, because we need to sort of step back and go, actually, is this my responsibility? Is this something I'm meant to be doing? I mean, I actually know that you've had some situations, and I'm going off piste here, I know, but in a work situation where you've been doing things that actually are above and beyond, but because you've always done them, people have come to expect them. And I know I've been in the same situation with working environments in the past as well, where all of a sudden I'm stopping doing that. Like, it feels weird to you to stop doing it because you've always been doing it. So there's an element of, oh no, I feel like I should be doing it. Like, I feel like this is my job and my responsibility, even though it's not. So it's about like, sometimes it can help with these situations to look at extreme examples and give these kind of, and in that situation, what would that be? So taking that extreme example of I've fed Serena every single meal with lots of Claire bites for every meal that she's had since she's been an adult. And then if I stopped doing that, when you start looking at it in that situation, like, well, that's not harming. That's just not doing the thing that we've been doing that has happened to have met somebody's needs above and beyond what they're doing for themselves. And the challenge is a lot of the time is that because people don't know how to meet their own needs, somebody else stopping meeting their needs appears to be abandoning them or taking something away from them. But in actual fact, if you continue doing something for somebody else to meet their needs, which is not your job and responsibility, you're actually removing by stopping to doing that, you give them the opportunity to learn how to do it for themselves. So it's about recognizing this from all of these different layers and seeing that not only is it something that it's not our job and not our responsibility, we're not harming them, but in actual fact, sometimes we can be offering them something by stopping taking that responsibility and stopping doing something for them, and actually helping them to learn, one, how to meet their need for themselves, how to do it for themselves, because that's the thing, we don't know how to meet our needs, which is why when somebody else kind of pulls away who's been doing something, we say like, oh, no, you can't do that to me.
But I'll starve.
Yeah,
it's not, I mean...
Exactly.
If I get hungry, then if she's not there, I can.
Well, and not only that, but if you haven't learned how to do that for yourself, you would soon figure it out.
Yes.
Great example. Weird example. When I was at university, I was in my very first year, I was in halls of residence, and there was a guy who was in the halls of residence with us, who he'd never been taught how to cook a meal. I mean, when you think about it, 18 years old, had never learned how to cook any meal. We didn't realize this. And so and this is, I mean, showing my age here, before Google. It wasn't as easy to find things out as it is these days. The pattern that happened was we were noticing he ate every single meal at the fast food joint on campus. And we were like, every meal he's there. And so we ended up having a conversation with him, and it turned out, lo and behold, he didn't know how to cook for himself. He figured it out. He went and ordered food at the place on campus. If he hadn't been able to afford to do that, he probably would have been able to find his way to a local shop and buy a loaf of bread and a thing of butter, and like he would have gone from there. I actually taught him how to make beans on toast, because and then for the longest time, that's all he ate as well, because that was what he knew how to make. And eventually, like, as we all spent time together, he learned how to cook different things and everything. But this is the thing, is that if you don't know, if someone doesn't know how to do it and it is part of their survival needs, it's part of their trunk needs, especially in this day and age, they're going to figure it out. They're going to be able to find out how to do it. They're going to be able to Google it. They're going to be able to figure out how to do it. So it's not that they can't do it. It's just that in a lot of these cases, it's easier for you to do it for them because that's what they're used to. And that initial, oh my goodness, you're not going to do it for me anymore. And the thought is, well, my needs are subconsciously is like, my needs aren't going to get met, or I don't know how to do it. Well, you know what? This is a great opportunity to figure it out.
That's an empowering thing.
Absolutely. Learning how to be able to do that for yourself. And when we do that, when we do things for other people, that's not our job and responsibility consistently, where we are, that are these other people are becoming dependent on us for getting our needs met. That's one of those places where that dependency creates a disempowerment. And we'll go into this in another podcast episode, I'm sure. But by doing that for them, removing that dependency, they have to learn how to figure it out for themselves. And that's more empowering. You can support someone in learning how to do it for themselves, as we did with the guy who was living on campus. I taught him how to make several meals because he didn't know, and at the time it was harder to find out. So I supported him with that, but I didn't go, oh, you know what, you know how to cook, I'll cook for you every single meal. Because if I'd done that, he would never have learned how to cook for himself. And that's basically how he got to that point in life, was somebody who cooked every meal for him and he'd never learned and they'd never taught him. So he got off to this place where he was first, like, finally on his own for the first time in life. And then he was like, oh, I don't know how to do this, but I know how to order from a fast food restaurant. So that's what he did. Mm-hmm. So it's important to look at this and look at the layers to it, because it's not always as simple as it seems. But at its base level, we have this responsibility to be respectful, to not do harm, but we do not have the responsibility to meet needs. If they are an adult who has the ability to do it for themselves, that is not our job and responsibility. We can choose to, we can support with, but it is not our responsibility. So saying no or stopping doing that is not doing harm to another person.
I want to give a couple examples that are a little less extreme or weird. And the first one is an example of when something does do damage to somebody. So if I'm angry about something and I shout at somebody else, this is me meeting my needs in a way that is harmful to another person. It's not respecting them, and it will negatively impact their needs, their security need, their emotional expression and emotional experience and expression need. Multiple needs are impacted if I am yelling. There is another way
Yes. Yes, you're absolutely right. I just wanted to jump in. The reason that a security need would probably be up at that point is if you're shouting at somebody else, they're probably not going to feel safe. Mm-hmm. That might be they don't feel emotionally safe, or they might not feel physically safe around you. And it might it might affect their emotional experience expression need, because it will end up triggering stuff in them that they otherwise wouldn't be experiencing and needing to express. So sorry, I just wanted to add that to what you were saying.
No, that is completely okay. So that's an area that we would be doing harm. And there are other ways. There are always other options that could be handled in a way that meets your needs without impacting the other. Mm-hmm. Now, to reference something that is not our responsibility, mm-hmm. if I've been volunteering to help a friend with something, if I've volunteering to help them move, or to come and make them dinners for a week because they've, had a traumatic experience or something like that.
Or just take them grocery shopping once a week, or cook meals for them once a week, every week. These things tend to show up. These experiences tend to show up when people are in a pattern of doing something over and over again for a long period of time. That's the place that it shows up most frequently. But I have a funny example. If I remember, I'm going to circle back to it.
All right, I'll try to help you remember.
Thank you.
Circle back. So these little favors that we do that kind of become the consistent, and it's like, oh, just well, I don't mind doing it. Mm-hmm. And if I all of a sudden realize I no longer have the capacity to do it, and I say no to not doing it in the future, that's not harming the other person. It was nice that I was going to be able to help them to move and that I was able to do what I could, but me not honoring my capacity and saying I'm actually not able to do that any further isn't harming them. It's just no longer helping them. Mm-hmm. in a place, Claire referenced it earlier, a place where I have experienced this multiple times is in a work situation. And an example of this would be taking on projects that aren't your responsibility to help others out. I used to fall into that pattern. I'm like, oh, I can do that. I can do that. And then it became almost expected. And so then when I didn't have the capacity to do it anymore, the time or the resources, saying no, it has been situations where it's almost earth-shattering to them. They're like, what? But how is it?
How dare you?
Yeah, how is this going to get done?
Right.
Well, how did it get done before me? How is it going to get done after me? Saying no was not harming those people because it wasn't part of my job responsibility in the first place. I was being helpful. I was doing a little bit extra. And in my own defense, yes, I made it the constant, and it became something I was doing regularly. But me deciding that it was no longer serving me to do that is not harm. That is just not my job responsibility. And I'm glad that I could do it for the time that I could. But it doesn't mean I have to continue forever.
So I have another extreme and utterly ridiculous example of this, just because it was something I saw in a post a while ago. I think it was in the last week or so, where somebody was asking for advice, and it was one of these funny things that went viral because it was so ridiculous. This person was saying that they were a single parent and they had a child. Funnily enough, most parents do. And what they were saying was that there was they'd had a babysitter, and they'd hired a babysitter to babysit for the child. And what they were saying was, because the person had accepted a quote unquote father role by babysitting for the parent, could they go after them for child maintenance because they had assumed a fatherly responsibility? And so they believed that they could get child maintenance from this person because they had assumed that responsibility. And it's like, hold on a second, let's break this down. And when you look at it, I mean, it's an extreme example. And if you were watching the video, you will have seen Serena's face when I said that. And it's like, people like, most people.
In what world?
Right, and most people look at that and go, what? How would you even think this is possible? But again, it's like a lot of the time in that situation, I don't know how to get my needs met. I don't know how to get my child's needs met. So there's some kind of warped reasoning. And I always say the brain is a fantastic machine. It will convince us of utterly ridiculous things to try to get our unmet needs met. And in this situation, no, he didn't take on a fathership role. He took on a job as a babysitter. He was paid as a babysitter. He did a job as a babysitter. At no point was he assuming the responsibility for the child. So
I feel like that would come with a contract or something,
right? and so I'm guessing, I could be wrong, but I'm guessing that if this person had approached this guy and said to him, "Oh, I'm coming after you for for child support because you took on this fatherly role," I'm guessing he probably said no, or words to that effect.
I bet the words were not to that effect, but
and again, it's like, that was never his job. That was never his responsibility. Expecting him to meet that need was completely unreasonable. And him not meeting that need was not doing either of the other parties harm in that situation. But sometimes it can help. That's why I said, like, going to an extreme example can be like, wait, no, that's ridiculous. But sometimes because the subtleties in the day-to-day, because we're so conditioned and we're so in these habits, they can be sometimes tough to spot because we're so used to doing things, or we're so used to other people doing things, that we actually don't stop and notice where actually that's not their job, that's not my job. Saying no is perfectly reasonable in this situation. So sometimes taking things to an extreme can help. So go ahead.
I was going to say, I know you have a personal example that is a great one for this.
Yes. And so I have had some ex-partners. I've had one or two. It's not always been the best dynamics that I've seen with people who I've been in relationship with and other family members, for example. So, I mean, this is going back quite some time now. There was a very poor relationship between this person's parents. And because of the poor relationship between the parents, what ended up happening was is that one of these parents started to put expectations on the ex that I was dating at the time that were never his. Were not his responsibility and were not appropriate either. These were needs that should have been met either by themselves or within the context of their intimate relationship within their lives, or even sometimes with friends. Like there were other ways of getting this need met, but it was definitely never the son's responsibility, and it wasn't appropriate for her to expect that those needs to be met by the son. So the interesting thing was when he said no to these things, or to put boundaries down and establish a more or a less toxic dynamic, shall we say, in that relationship, she acted like he had harmed her. Like she acted like he'd traumatized her because she felt abandoned, or she felt like she wasn't being supported. And what ended up happening was it ended up causing this kind of almost sense of guilt in him, even though there was a part of him that knew this is not okay, this is not reasonable, it's not my job, I shouldn't be doing this. But because that expectation was there from her, that put this kind of unspoken pressure on him that meant that him saying no to a completely unreasonable way of behaving was perceived as him doing harm to her. In fact, all he'd done was say no to an unhealthy and toxic dynamic between them, and to responsibilities that were never his to have. She could have sought help from a number of different ways. She could have gone and got professional help with like a therapist, like relationship counseling. She could have gone to the partner. She could have gone to friends. There were all kinds of different places she could have gone to get those needs met. She could have learned to meet them for herself. That's another option. And so because there were other ways of her meeting those needs, and she was an adult who had the ability to meet these needs for herself, it was not him. He was not doing harm to her by saying no, and he was not doing harm to her by putting boundaries down. And this is one of the things I see so often in when I work with clients around needs. There is often a lot of guilt and a lot of expectation, sense of obligation around family dynamics, and around the expectation of what should be done, what somebody should do, what makes you a quote unquote good son, or a good daughter, or a good brother, or a good sister, or like you name it, any family relationship. There is these, just because somebody else has an expectation that you should do it a certain way doesn't necessarily mean it's your responsibility, and doesn't mean that saying no or putting boundaries down is you harming that other person. That is just, we have to remember what boundaries are. Boundaries are simply telling other people what is and isn't okay. Your boundaries are what is and isn't okay with you. And so communicating that, or creating situations that honor that and that create what's okay for you and stop what is not okay for you, is not you harming another person, as long as it's being done in a way that doesn't cause direct harm to another person. And obviously that's where we're talking about if you've got dependence, or how it's done, or those sorts of things. But that's not harming another person. That is you taking responsibility for your needs and not taking responsibility for needs that are not yours.
I have an example that actually kind of tacks right on to the family dynamics, but I'm going to get a little specific with it. Mm-hmm. I'm going to get specific with a generalized example. How about that?
I like your way.
So what I'm going to touch upon is something that was very present for a lot of people in my life this year. It was not something that I specifically dealt with myself. However, I was witness to this, and it was interesting kind of sitting on the sidelines seeing these family dynamics around the holidays, and something that we call like holiday guilt. And a lot of it was around tradition, how things have looked forever, what we have done forever, what the family has always done,
what they expect to happen,
and the expectations that even if a family changes, if it's two partners that then have a child, they want that entire family unit to follow in suit with tradition, because that's what meets the needs of the person kind of
Judging or having those expectations or
Yes.
demanding that things be done a certain way.
And
Yeah.
the demanding is kind of what really stuck with me, because I had multiple friends who had issues with the holiday tradition in location. Oh, we're going to pack up the whole car and I'm going to, bring my child to this place 4 hours away and they can't spend the holidays in their own house. But we have to do this because if not, we're going to have to deal with this person and this person. They're going to say this and this is going to happen. And, and then we're going to be the bad people in the family. And I heard these dialogues of spinning into this holiday guilt. And I'm like, oh, but there are other options. There's other ways to get these tradition needs met, or the needs that the tradition is meeting.
Yeah,
there's another way to meet these. And it was really weird stepping back and being the need for tradition wasn't the need.
Right.
There was another need underlying that tradition was meeting.
Or multiple needs.
Or
in
multiple
most cases,
needs.
yeah.
So whether it was like the physical location, or we have to watch a movie on Christmas because that's our tradition. And if we don't watch a movie, somehow Christmas has been ruined. If you're the person saying, no, we're not going to do this, you've ruined Christmas right there.
Right.
That's it. It's done.
And to talk about some of the needs that may have sat underneath that. So it could be, for example, by you being here, I feel connected with you. So it's meeting my love and connection need. Or it may be that the security need is being met by the tradition because it's comfortable, it's familiar, it's what's always happened. And so that need is being met. Now, not necessarily in the best possible way, not necessarily the most effective way, but that's one of the ways it's been met. It could be emotional expression. The only way I get to experience this emotion that I want to experience around the holidays is if we do this thing in this way at this time with these people in this location. And it's like, hold on a second. Maybe there's another way of meeting those needs.
All the tradition was a strategy for those people to get some of those needs met.
Yeah.
And when you focus on what the actual need was, you may, like Claire said, find other ways to meet that need. So if it's the connection aspect of it, maybe there could be, you don't want to travel for so long that doesn't actually serve you. Maybe you could do a phone call or a Zoom call, or let's do a date.
Send videos.
A date that works a little bit better where it's not crammed into the holiday season. I mean, families want to start their own traditions, and there's a lot of guilt surrounding wanting to start your own tradition if it takes away from, if it appears to take away from somebody else and to harm somebody else. And I kind of want to just put it, I can't get this thought out of my head, is thinking of families getting together for the holidays and those kind of dynamics. I don't know many of them that go the way that they're supposed to when you're actually in that situation. As an adult, those gatherings, it's like, you have to manage yourself. You have to manage your expectations. You're like,
what's really funny is I just heard the plane come over, but because of the sound that came through initially, it was like a bomb. It was like,
kind of.
And it was like, that actually really correlates to what you're saying, because sometimes that's exactly how it feels. It's like, we think it's going to be this amazing thing, boom, and it blows up in everybody's faces.
Well, and a lot of times, if you think about the pre-tradition, getting to that point, family dynamics that I've been involved in, it's like, this person's going to be like this. And you're working yourself up before. So you go into it with, you're like, I hope this is the best Christmas ever. And then when stuff starts to go awry, you're like, well, I knew this was going to happen. But
and the anxiety ahead of time also compromises needs, because it creates a situation in which you're afraid about your needs not getting met in the future. I mean, there's so many layers to this. And I think the thing to remember with this is that in this situation, tradition was a strategy for how people wanted to get their needs met. That's the key. And there is a big difference between the need and the preference somebody has for the way they want to get the need met. And the way they want to get the need met is not necessarily the most effective. It's not something you are necessarily responsible for. It's not necessarily the best way of getting the needs met. It's just the way that they would like to get it met. And just because that's how somebody would like to get it met doesn't mean that by stopping them from by not engaging, it's not even like you're stopping them. And you want to do that tradition, that's fine. But if I want to not partake in that, me not doing things the way you would like them to be done is not the same as me stopping your need from being met. The need itself is a must. The way that we want to get the need met is a preference. And we'll do another podcast. We'll do a podcast episode specifically on that, because there is a massive difference between the need and the preference that most people have for the way they get the need met. And the issue is most people get stuck on the preference, and that's what happens with the tradition. Mm-hmm. They get stuck on, it has to be this way. We have to do it this is the only way to get this need met, because they're thinking the need is the tradition, and it's not. The need is the things that the tradition meets. And once you understand what the needs are underneath, it opens up this whole plethora of options of other ways of getting the need met. But here's the thing, a lot of people don't want to look at what those other options are because they're so attached to the preference for the way they want to do it. If there are other alternatives, if they accept there are other alternatives or admit there are other alternatives, no longer do they feel that they can use that as a way of putting pressure on the other person to do the thing that they would like in order to get their needs met in the way they would want to. So this is the thing, is that once we know this and once we understand this, we can say, okay, I understand that you would like things to happen this way. Here are the things that I need to do for myself, for my family. And I understand that you're probably going to be disappointed. You can still empathize with somebody else. You can say, I get that you're going to be disappointed because this is not the way you would like it to be. And right now I don't have the capacity. Right now we're starting our own traditions. Right now you don't even have to give an explanation. The answer, just actually we're not going to do that this year, is enough. You may want to give a little bit more context because it may soften the blow a little bit, or the perceived blow of we're not going to do things the way that we want, that you would want us to do them. But we need to get very, very clear on this difference between preference and need, and the fact that the difference between doing harm and the difference between doing things that were never your responsibility. If it was not your responsibility, choosing not to do it is not doing harm to another person. So there's another example. Is there anything you want to add to that before I move on?
No, I'm just realizing that I feel sorry for all those years that I made my mother watch A Christmas Story every Christmas morning until I saw the whole thing. But I'd consistently, year after year, fall asleep through it repeatedly throughout the day. So until I saw every clip of the movie, it didn't have to be in order. It must have been torture for her.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Mom.
Just it's funny the things that we realize when you kind of go through this.
And that was very light. It was it's a humorous example, but this is something that's really serious for a lot of people. And this is something that actually creates rifts in families.
Yeah.
The holiday tradition and people's desire to do something different to meet their needs rather than the need of the person who is really holding on to that.
Absolutely. And we're going to do another podcast episode in the future about traditions that are getting passed on because they used to meet a need and they don't actually meet a need anymore. Because that's another thing, is that so often traditions were created for a purpose because they met needs at a certain time, in a certain location with certain people. But actually those traditions may now compromise needs rather than meet them. So there might be different ways of doing things. So we're going to get to that in another episode as well. So the final example that I have was, I was talking to a friend a while ago and she was explaining a situation in which she'd said no to a friend of hers who had expected her to help them out with something. I can't remember even exactly what the example was. And this person acted like she'd harmed them, like she'd done something like horrific to them. But the reality was there were so many other ways of them meeting that same need. It just wasn't as easy. It just wasn't convenient. And sometimes it actually required them putting some energy and effort into it rather than leaving all of that at somebody else's door. And I think that's quite often what it is. It's like, oh, well, if this person is going to do this, when this person does this, I don't have to use as much energy. I don't have to put in as much effort. I don't have to think about this at all. So it's easier and simpler. But in order for us to have healthy, mutually fulfilling relationships, things have to work for both people. And if there is that expectation of you doing something and you do it for somebody else because that's what the expectation has been, if it doesn't truly work for you, if it crosses your boundaries, if it's something that's not in alignment with your capacity, whether you're aware of it or whether it not, it will build a teeny tiny piece of resentment within that relationship. And until that gets addressed, and normally it's not a one-off incident, normally this is something that happens over and over and over again, that resentment builds and it actually slowly eats away at the relationship over time. It erodes the relationship over time. So not only does saying no is not harming other people, quite often it can be a way of you can be doing it because you're setting a boundary in order to get closer to other people. And we've spoken a lot about this in previous episodes. And we're going to do another episode specifically on this aspect of it going forward. We touched on it, I think, in the boundaries episode, which was episode 7. But we're going to do a boundaries mini-series coming forward as well, where we're going to kind of go into this in more depth and be like, okay, we need to really understand boundaries because they're a really big deal. And so sometimes actually by doing this, even though in the short term, it might feel like it's problematic to the other person, or it's inconvenient, or it's not the way they would like things to be done, by addressing that, it provides the opportunity to get closer to people. And not everybody will take that opportunity and get closer. Some people will get frustrated, and some people will feel entitled to the thing that you've done. That's okay. And it's not your responsibility to change that. And it's also not something that, it's also an indicator that maybe that need isn't as mutually beneficial and mutually fulfilling as you would like it to be in order for it to feel good for both people. So it's one of those things where sometimes by saying no, by not doing harm, but setting those boundaries around the things that you don't have the responsibility for and you don't have the capacity for, sometimes that can be an opportunity also to bring these relationships close together with the right people who are willing to really dive into that space of figuring out how to do relationship in a way that works for both of us. So anything more you want to add on this before we dive out? I'm right. Well, normally we dive in, but apparently we're diving out today.
Well, if we dove in, then we can dive out.
Right?
We'll dive back into this on our next episode in the Selfirst Series.
Mm-hmm. We're going to be in that one. We're going to be looking at the difference between a safe space and a comfortable space, and also how sometimes a space that feels comfortable maybe actually might compromise your needs. So it's an interesting aspect of the self-first piece, but it's actually a very important one. So looking forward to that.
Stay tuned.
Right, what we'll say in the meantime is thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Sending you lots of love. Stay safe until we see you again. And remember, between now and then, to continue meeting your needs. Lots of love. Bye.
Bye, guys.
That's it for today.
If you like what you heard
and would like to see some of Serena's awesome facial expressions,
check out the video podcast on YouTube.
And remember, there's a difference between doing harm to others and choosing not to meet needs that were never your responsibility in the first place.
Well, shit. It really is that simple.